This is the third lesson on the carbon cycle. We looked at the structure of the environment and the structure of ecosystems. Now we're going to look at how certain nutrients cycle around and are reused continuously. So the carbon cycle is powered by the sun. It's a storage of energy products built from photosynthesis. And you need to be able to tell me, using the word anthropogenic, when humans make the disruptions, what we've done to the earth. You know all of this from before you ever met me. I'm just going to be tweaking it with a few terms in a formula. What is it? This is time for some grammar lessons. It is a process, okay, behind plants and animals exchanging nutrients and energy. Its primary power source is the sun, and it uses the chemicals oxygen, water, carbon dioxide, and stored sugars or carbohydrates. Starches, sugars, carbohydrates are the same thing. They represent energy. It is very easy to measure the state of balance in the carbon cycle because the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are easily measured. The presence of carbon in all life is easy to prove because all plant and animal tissue, when burnt, releases carbon. This is a well done steak or blackened chicken, etc., burned to a crisp. Words are very important. Here's my original dorky little drawing I did in like 1990 using a DOS level computer. And what I did was I put the three processes in boxes. So these are the verbs: the process of respiration, decomposition, and photosynthesis, the energy and stored carbs. So make sure you make this distinction. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants take in carbon dioxide, build stored sugars, and release oxygen. Energy is needed to power this cycle. So radiant energy in the sun lands on green plants. Mushrooms don't count. They photosynthesize, which allows them to use carbon dioxide, produce oxygen, and this is the part that you may not know. They store the energy. Now, a strawberry, it doesn't belong on the tree, but it's the perfect example. You can tell there's stored energy in the strawberry. I want you to think of a bright red strawberry on the tree because then you won't forget on a test. But the fact is there's energy in the tree trunk and there's energy in the leaves, but we ain't goats, so we can't eat that part. Now, animals do the dead reverse. We undergo cellular respiration where we spit out the CO2 and take in the oxygen and then raid the tree of its fruit, unless they're the nasty trees in Wizard of Oz and they won't let us have their fruit. Now, decomposition is actually the same as respiration. When an animal dies and decomposes, all that's happening is tiny animals we can't see, except maybe earthworms, are eating you. So there's no difference between cell respiration and decomposition. So when you die, you're actually still technically breathing for a while. It's all the decomposition process, and you will continue to release carbon dioxide, but at a much slower pace. Now, as a formula, in grade 10, they may expect you to learn this. Photosynthesis goes this way, respiration goes this way. I will not test you on that formula. Why do we call it cellular respiration? We breathe. We go, that's not the same as respiration. You've never heard an earthworm going, they don't. So many animals don't have lungs. They just flap their gills, they just soak in air, but they still use oxygen just like us. So scientists, to be specific, said cellular respiration, meaning every cell of their body needs oxygen. They don't mean breathing through lungs like your doctor does. That's why they give it the fancy name. Currently, the Earth's atmosphere is 21% oxygen, 0.05% carbon dioxide. So which process is running faster? The one that makes oxygen or the one that makes CO2 when these are the ratios? Again, you don't need to be taught this. Think about it. On Earth, the biotic carbon dioxide sources, meaning the life that is made oxygen and carbon dioxide. There's only one. There's no other significant source of oxygen on the planet. Sources of CO2 on Earth. Any animal that breathes oxygen, plants will breathe oxygen, Okay, they may breathe oxygen at night more than they do photosynthesis because the sun's down. But as a plant is growing, in order to use energy, it has to breathe. So when an apple tree is making apples, a lot of times it's in, when it's making more tree, it's in growth mode and it will suck its fruit down. This is why a apple tree that's allowed to grow wild and gets really big, the apples get smaller. And dead things, when they decompose, release lots of CO2. Okay. So there are two main sources, animals and dead things. And yes, plants will respirate when they need to. Abiotic carbon dioxide and oxygen means non living production of these two gases. Oxygen, nothing. There's almost no source of oxygen on planet Earth that isn't from plants. Okay? Carbon dioxide. Anything that's set fire to makes CO2. Here's the methane gas in the lab taps and your natural gas at home. Take methane, you burn it in oxygen, there she be, CO2 and water. Volcanic gases and the oceans have dissolved incredible quantities of carbon dioxide throughout history. And if the water gets warmer, it starts bubbling it out. And it's really an odd thing because warm liquids will dissolve sugar better, but if you warm up a pop, it'll spit out its CO2. So liquids hold gases better if they're cold. And we're going to see how the release of CO2 from water actually can wipe out entire civilizations. The big point that people misunderstand about photosynthesis is their behavior to be environmentally friendly. This gardener here thinks he's being friendly by composting his leaves, but there's literally no difference between him feeding the grass to an animal, composting it in his backyard, and setting fire to it. The only difference is this guy doing a controlled burn is releasing CO2 instantly. The cow will start breathing out the CO2 within a couple hours of eating the plants. The human, the CO2 from this pile will just take like a year to be released. So there is no difference in terms of global warming whether you feed the grass to a buffalo, let it rot, or burn it. Now, there's a difference in the soil quantity, but if you think you're helping global warming by composting, no, you're not. You're just releasing the CO2 at a different rate. Anthropogenic sources of carbon dioxide. Anthropic, like generator, is to make. The main ones in our society are our houses, our factories, our cars, and clear cutting and burning down forests. So those are your main sources of CO2. And the car is just a wickedly bad one. And our houses in Canada are also for heating a huge CO2 source. This, if we look in our society, 30% of CO2 production is in cars, and another 30% is electricity. So our electricity and our cars are more than half of our CO2 production. And if we look at the global production of CO2, China is at 30%, the US at 15. Canada would be 1.5 on that scale because we have 1/10 the population of the United States. This is the measured carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere, the releases, since 1900. And that's a large part due to the automobile. There are carbon sources and sinks, and I'm going to pause the video here before it times out, and I will discuss those in part B.